Welcome to MSP 1337. I'm your host, Chris Johnson, a show dedicated to cybersecurity challenges, solutions, a journey together, not alone. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of MSP 1337. I'm joined this week by Adam Duman of Vanta. Welcome to the show.
Yep. No, thank you. I very much appreciate the invite, sir. It's amazing what happens when you're at a conference talking to people.
Especially when it's involved in cybersecurity. We clickbaited this episode. We didn't plan to talk necessarily about what we have today in advance. We definitely didn't talk about this in advance, other than like, hey, think about this topic. CMMC is a fraud. I want to make it clear right out of the gate. I do not think CMMC is actually a fraud. I think that the real question here is the balancing act around how you get yourself in hot water and commit fraud because you're so focused on CMMC. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, I think that there's so much that's interwoven into CMMC, right? The False Claims Act is in there. The three levels all have different requirements around what kind of data you're processing, how the audits work. It's very, very complex, even on paper, which means in application, it's going to be even more of a rat's nest. Yeah.
I don't know that I have it anymore, but there was a great CMMC did a Venn diagram of CMMC, and I don't know if they've updated it for version 2, but what I really liked about it is it really highlighted the things that CMMC tries to solve, right? Like there are elements of these frameworks, and we know that all contractors need to do these things. So we're going to call that CMMC, create a framework, and now there's not all this other peripheral noise. The caveat or the problem that not the program has, but no one's saying we're doing away with these other frameworks. They're not saying like for DFARS or ITAR, those are just going to go away because now we have CMMC. And I've seen it through multiple iterations of working with those that contract with one of the agencies, or even are, 1 degree back in the supply chain, go, I have to be CMMC compliant. I'm like, well, okay, but what does that mean for your business as far as like dotting the I's and crossing the T's, so that you're not just blindly working towards satisfying safeguards within a framework, but you're also looking at holistically. The goal that they have is that you're not done because you checked boxes and are like, yay, I did it. You work for Vanta. I mean, one of the things you guys do is help people navigate frameworks and even on a larger scale to navigate how frameworks intertwine with each other, because no one wants to do repetitive lifting when they don't need to. But at the same time, we know that each framework, in most cases, represents a different data type. That's why they came into being, right? Like I need to protect, arms and ammunitions, or I need to protect, whatever, right? And I think it's really easy to lose sight of the intent behind what they're trying to protect. And the second part of that is, as you protect it, so you don't have to do extra lifting, is the way in which you protect it similar or same, so you're not doing repetitive extra lifting. So walk me through, like, what are your thoughts around? I mean, again, we're saying we don't think CMMC is fraud. I need to emphasize that. But there's a lot of dangers happening, and I think it's important that we talk about it. That's why I wanted to have this episode.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think one of the fundamental things that worries me about it is it's characteristically vague. Like a lot of the, FedRAMP or 853, DFARS, ITAR, whatever it is. I was talking to a friend who works at the Pentagon, and we were having a chat, and I mentioned 80171, CMMC, and he's like, oh, what's your opinion of CUI? I was like, it's anything the DoD has breathed on or thought about breathing on. and
Might
he
even be
just
written on a rock outside the
yeah,
smoke.
yeah, it doesn't matter. It's now controlled unclassified
Right,
information.
right, right.
What about FCI, which I think is federal contractor information, right? That might
That's
actually be
the level one.
defined,
Yeah,
but like the application of, like you were saying, what does this mean for my business? The actual definitions are so vague of what is actually in scope, what actually am I trying to protect. It is almost entirely contract driven. It's not, to my understanding or my read, actually focused on, in practice at least, focused on the systems and the data. It's focused on what are the contractual obligations that we're committing to. Because
right,
in order to define, right, metadata is considered covered by CUI definition, if memory serves.
right.
Metadata, sure, if I have metadata that, oh, it swims in the water and it has gills, maybe that's important, maybe it's not. I need the contract or my customer to tell me if they care about that or not as part of the contracting process. And
Sure.
that adds so many layers of uncertainty to a system that is already really vague and that is already really poorly defined.
Yeah, don't forget the assumed or implied. Like,
Mhm.
it wasn't written into the contract, but you're still obligated to do it.
Yeah, just because you don't know the law doesn't mean you don't have to follow the law, right? Yeah,
Right, right.
it's this whole thing where we spoke about it briefly before we started the episode, but the environment, the ecosystem itself, NIST, FedRAMP, CMMC, it's almost designed to be the playground of people who have already done it. It's I don't think it's by design, but it's definitely hostile to people who want to enter. Unless you already are an expert or were trained by an expert, I haven't found a whole lot of people who are super confident in their knowledge who didn't learn it as part of the federal government or learn it as a federal government contractor.
Yeah, you're seeing a lot of players in the space that are serving that industry, hiring their resources to be the consultants or the client facing that came directly from experience with one of
Yeah.
those agencies.
Yeah. And that means you get a lot of a really high floor of knowledge, right? Your
Yeah,
average consultant in the space is going to be familiar with it, will have lots of experience with it. But that also means that it can be cost prohibitive. That means that it's usually wrapped up with a lot of other organizational scar tissue, for lack of a better term. Um, and even beyond that, it makes it really hard to get new practitioners into the field.
yeah.
If the only way to learn it is to have done it, there's only one pathway into the industry. There's only one way to know CMMC, and that's to join the federal government, 10,
Yeah.
15, 20 years, right? How do you do it yourself if there's no good knowledge out there about it other than, oh, just download the PDF?
Well, right. So there's obviously some deep I don't want to say deep. Deep's not the right word. There's a lot of crosswalk in the world of frameworks today when it comes to specifically on the technology side, like protecting data. And I was thinking about this last week. I think it was the last week. It was actually before I ran into you at Blue Team Con. I was thinking about, like, if I were to summarize CMMC, like try to like reduce it down to like two things, what would it be? And I didn't have the idea like it should be two things when I first started on it, but it was like, we all know about enclaving, right? We know that it needs to be, where the data is in that controlled. Oh, wait, that's the access control list, right? Like we need to do that. And then the part two of that was the zero trust model around like a zero trust architecture or this gets into like your firewalls and network segmentation and all that, but like, and maybe even micro segmentation. But I just thought like those two things, like access control list and your zero trust infrastructure modeling is kind of what's being asked of you. Like, pray that you don't have to go through like zone 3 depending on where you're at, but like that's like the level 2 or zone 2. And then zone 3 gets into like, oh my word, like this is not for the faint of heart. Like this is some deep stuff, and I mean you really have to um figure it out. I mean, there's so many levels to this that you have to do that um I mean, we zone 1, that's the easy one. That's more that federal contract data. But like when you get into the other zones that are tied to that level 2 and level 3, man, we're not messing around anymore.
Yeah, it absolutely. condensing 5 levels into two, or sorry, 5 levels into three.
Yeah.
I was looking at the number two. You wind up with a place where all the hard stuff from level 4 went up a level, and all the easy stuff from level 4 went down a level, or was, consolidated.
Some sort of split there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the same kind of thing happened where I think level 1 is only 17 controls or 17 requirements.
I want to say it was 15, but 15 or 17. Yeah.
Yeah, it's sub 20. It's
It's less than.
easier in quotation marks than a
Yeah.
PCI SAC A, right?
Right.
But we've moved into this place where it used to be, I think it was advanced / progressive, proactive, good, intermediate, and basic were like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And it's become, I want to say, basic, intermediate, expert, or something like that. They've really dropped the pretense around the level of difficulty. And a lot of the controls that I've seen for it are, it's representative, but it's painful.
Right.
Even at level 2, it's a lot. It's extremely prescriptive. And I think we wind up back in a place where we have that same, this is a highly prescriptive control with very little actual guidance around it that is super
Right.
unique to the environment. I've never seen this before. How do I do this? And that gets back into false claims. And well, we thought we had it implemented correctly. We thought we'd covered all of our bases.
Yeah.
The outreach and the training, right? I think there's a lot that is going to be important there that is probably not going to be live when it's really necessary. Yeah.
Well, the bigger the company, right? Especially companies that are diversified, trying to, Division A has, contracts with DoD or a subcontractor to DoD, but maybe none of the other divisions do. And just trying to think through, like, knowing when it makes sense to just do an enclave or to just do a small piece of it. Like, I mean, I know I've worked with companies in the past where, like, I can give them guidance all day long, and I could be 100% right and 100% wrong, even though my guidance isn't necessarily wrong. It's still not necessarily right sized for what their company business strategy looks like. And so they're going, man, based on what you're telling me, if I'm going to do this, I've got to do, say GCC high or GCC across the entire organization. I think I'm going to get a second opinion, right? Like, and I'm like, yeah, you absolutely should get a second opinion because I might be missing something. And then they're like, yeah, the consultant came back and said, we should just build out an enclave just for that one division of the company because they're the only division in the company that's handling CUI, and it only makes up, 15% of our total project revenue, right? Well, those are different rules. Like, but then you've got the companies that are like, well, it's just this one division, but our DoD contracts are 80% of our revenue. Well,
you've already built a business around it at that point.
Yeah. Like, why do we care about now the other divisions? Like, let's just put this all and say, this is what we're going after, right?
Yeah. Well, that's actually a really, really good takeaway. Coming from audit and Vanta and all that support, scope is your friend. Accurate scoping, figuring out where data lives, data inventory maps, data tracking, understanding exactly what you're talking about. Where does this data live? What parts of the company touch it and deal with it? And how do we minimize what we have to do? A lot of the guidance that I've seen is very deliberately uses the word implementation, not guidance.
Right.
And I think that's the right way to think about it. In our environment, based on what this requirement says, let's start. I don't care if it's a crayon map on the back of a bar napkin.
Right.
Let's draw out our ecosystem at a relatively high level, and then in red crayon, circle the places where this data lives.
Right.
Starting from there, shortcuts a lot of that worry, right? The idea that, do we go for the whole company? Do we go for the entire environment? Do we set up small enclaves that have to be compliant and work on them as their own little ecosystem? Scope management is rule 1 of audit and compliance. And I think that's actually a really, really good call out, is that thinking in that way, thinking about scope first, and then letting your scope drive your implementation is a really, really good call out.
Well, I mean, what I heard you say is it's really, whether or not you can get your hands on some good crayons. and that you've been really drinking and you still have a dry napkin to execute this strategy.
It's not that bad.
I think I think it's a good point that you bring up, because I think so many organizations get paralysis analysis, right? Like I can't even get started on this because this is too hard. And I'm not for one second saying that it's not hard and that you shouldn't consider engaging with a third party to help you get through this. In fact, I'd be, especially a large organization, lots of skin in the game, you probably should engage a third party. But your statement about knowing your scope, knowing what the rules of engagement kind of are, and then I think about like but what was the control objective that we're solving for? And I think that often gets twisted and distorted in the, well, it lives here and it lives here, and you're like, what is it? Like, oh, it's sensitive data. Like, well, hold on, our
What kind
objective
of sensitive
here,
data, right?
right?
Yeah.
We're not talking about all data. We're talking about, and maybe you're not even talking about all sensitive data, right? You're only talking about CUI sensitive data in the context of sort of our conversation today. They're not asking you to do it for everything else. Now there may be bleed over, right? Like PII and some other stuff may bleed into this, and you need to treat it. You might as well treat it in the same approach, right? You might say, hey, my approach to CUI and protecting that data, if my approach is good enough for that, I could probably use the same. I don't need to reinvent what I'm doing. But I think it's important that, and then the other piece that you said, how are we approaching this from a guidance perspective? I think trying to be overly prescriptive in the execution tends to put at risk the ability to achieve it at all.
Yeah. I mean, look at an ISO 27001 control. Thou shalt have an access management system, essentially. Thou shalt do periodic user access reviews. A lot of the CMMC 800-171 guidance is significantly more prescriptive than that. But NIST, credit where it's due, does a phenomenally good job in most cases of writing requirement guidance or flavor text that allows you to reinterpret through your own environment.
Right. That's like 27,002 is almost the guide to 27,001.
Yeah, you have Annex A in 27,001, which that's
Yep.
just do these things and you're
Yep.
pretty much there. 27,002 is this is the actual specific kind of intent behind the letter. Yeah.
Which is funny because it comes later. It's like, wait, people don't know what we're talking about. Let's add
That's a
another one. So,
yep.
so along those same lines, do you think we're going to see? I mean, I even think that CIS would benefit from, and they kind of have it with their guide, with their like template on how to, execute. But obviously, the CIS is more of a, these are prescriptive things to do to improve your security posture. They don't spend a lot of time to say, to ensure that you're protecting, say, CUI or financial data or fill in the blank. They really just say, we're going to leave that up to you, but here's some prescriptive approaches to whatever you put into this bucket is obtainable. Do you think we're going to need to see a guide like that with CMMC, or do you think it's going to be left to the consultants and the sort of the ecosystem around us to, we are the guys, we went through the training, and that's all you're going to get?
I I'm cautiously optimistic that the audit ecosystem and the consulting ecosystem will manage this problem, because I think that accurate scoping is an art. Accurate identification of what should or should not be included in the assessment
Right.
is a bit of an art. And even for something like, I'll go back to PCI because I'm painfully intimately familiar with it. The Standards Council for PCI has not given, they have some scope and guidance. Here's, stores, processes, transmits, or
Yeah.
impacts to security of storage, processing, or transmission. There's a little bit more detail, but not a lot.
Right.
Most of the time, the QSA organization, the QSA company themselves is who defines their own scoping methodology. They define their own processes for what they consider in or out of scope,
Right.
type 1 system, type 2 system, whatever you want to call it, type thing. I think that's where we're going to wind up. I don't think I want to see it, but I don't think that the DoD or NIST are going to be able to come up with a really hard, strong guideline or a defensible guideline for scoping beyond the very broad statements they already have. I think
Right.
that's going to be incumbent on the C3PAOs to figure out where they draw that line. And then auditor variance comes in, and we wind up with just one more in the same place we
I
are
mean,
today.
I think that's a really fair statement. I think, when we get to the assessing stage, the most important thing that I see today is that we see objective assessing happening. I think that, you know, wouldn't take much to suddenly start seeing biases appear for smaller or bigger. I could go either way, right? Where, yeah, we're not going to be as strict on the 5-person company because all they really do is make wiring harnesses for F-14 fighter pilot, fighter jets. But for, say the equivalent of a Northrop Grumman, um, we're not going to be as strict on them because we trust that they are already going to do these things. It's inherent in who they are. Those biases, I mean, they're going to happen. Look, I'm not trying to say that this is going to be a perfect world, but I think if the scoring model and the approach and how we educate assessors on what they're looking for, and I obviously have seen some of the stuff coming out of those that have been trained on it, that's what it's starting to resemble. We may see across other frameworks something similar, right? So we may in fact for the first time be seeing through CMMC a real model to map to an objective assessing that does not discriminate based on the size of the organization, or whether or not their financial portfolio is big enough to be the long-term answer in the DoD space, where obviously we've seen over the last 30 years there's been mass consolidation and elimination of competition to the DoD space.
Completely pragmatically speaking, I mean, I see this with FedRAMP. Um, there is an extremely strong bias for large enterprise in the federal space.
Right.
They're more stable, and that I think they're generally, I should say, in
Yeah.
theory, large enterprise is more stable, and they can absorb the costs more readily. So by design, the ecosystem is more expensive to kind of help vet, right? To help with vetting. And I don't know if I think that's the right thing, but I do think that CMMC might be one of the first times we're seeing of an actually level playing field. There are a lot of different ways to do a FedRAMP assessment based on tech stack and all kinds of, right, the level low, medium, LI SAS, whatever. But the actual requirements that a 3PAO has to satisfy internally for their own processes and from an evidence collection perspective, a quality perspective, if there's gray area, they can actually lose their ability to deliver FedRAMP assessments. If it's
Right.
not objectively implemented correctly and fully, that's not to say that assessors don't miss things and QA doesn't miss
Sure.
stuff. But CMMC, I think, is going to be a lot of that same kind of thing where you have to do it right. Hopefully, you have to do it right. What right looks like might differ based on your resourcing, but you have to do it right. There are a lot, like, there's lower cost ways of doing some of this that might be more labor intensive, but we're
Sure.
starting. Yeah, I think we're actually going to see fairly even-handed application,
Yeah.
at least initially, until the players settle in, and then yeah.
Well, I think this is I mean, this is no different than what we're facing with the trust mark. No one has, as of today, been assessed with the new cybersecurity trust mark. And what I find interesting about that, not that they haven't been assessed yet, but I am less concerned about them getting assessed this year or whenever they do the first initial assessment. What I'm worried about is our ability, and I don't mean that we as in the Trustmark team and those resources that are involved. I'm looking at this more throughout, right? Like CMMC would be another example of this. What does it look like in year two? How do we maintain objectivity and the maturity process when you have something like, well, they acquired an entity, or they acquired the entity 45 days before their follow-up assessment is going to occur. There's a lot of provisionals that need to get added into that because you can't just tell the organization that's being assessed, no, don't acquire a company. It's going to compromise your trust mark or your CMMC certification. It may impact it during the assessment, but what does a remediation window that's realistic look like? Is it 30 days? Is it 365 days? I think those are things that we're going to see a necessity for, and even on a larger scale with frameworks that already have repeat assessing happening, but we're starting to see the necessity for those being assessed shrink, right? Like, so you have all this assessing happening, and whether it's ISO or SOC or fill in the blank, businesses as a whole are starting to recognize the need to have their business scrutinized to ensure that they are not full of, they're not doing the high-end Swiss cheese approach to their security practice, right? Like, it was the best Swiss cheese I ever had. There were so many holes and it was amazing. It's like, and maybe we should buy you some crackers with holes in it too, right? Um, I digress, but
you said you had to go cook dinner, right?
I know, right?
I can tell.
I'm getting hungry. I'm getting hungry. So, I think we've I don't want to say ping pong balled this, but like we've been around the horn with regards to challenges that we know will come up. And again, this wasn't meant to downplay or even beat on CMMC. I think these are problems that have existed long before CMMC came into play. They'll be around long after CMMC is the final ruling. But I think, and I hope those that are listening are hearing like, hey, if you didn't know what CMMC is, you can now go look it up. And if you don't know what the trust mark is and you're a solution provider, you should go get on the wait list. But more importantly, and you hit it earlier, is if you're going to go down the path of needing to obtain CMMC certification, whether it's through self-attestation or brought on with an assessor, you got to find a place to start. And the broader you allow that scope to be, the harder it's going to be to start. And I'm not saying that small scope means you satisfy CMMC, but small scope means that you are not negligent and you're not playing the card of like, well, I just couldn't do anything because it was too hard. You said it. Today, it's probably going to be pretty even-handed. They're looking for, and we saw this with healthcare too, right? And when the omnibus rule first came out, if you were being assessed or audited for HIPAA, failure to meet HIPAA compliance, it was less about beating you up unless you were truly being negligent and ignorant to
it's a best effort kind of approach. Yeah.
And I think that's part of what assessors have to look for, right? Like, are they doing best effort? And within best effort, there can still be the exception of like, despite your best efforts, this is not getting where it needs to be. But that's a whole lot different than, I heard about this thing called CMMC, or I heard about this thing called HIPAA. I'm too small for them to care about me, or it doesn't matter. I'm in this state. Those are what we have to really worry about, right?
Yeah, GDPR has been in a similar place for a while, where enforcement bodies have been very deliberately, if there's a complaint and if there's an investigation, if you're showing best effort, if you're making a genuine attempt, even if you made mistakes, they're generally not issuing fines. They're not really coming after you unless you are specifically being negligent about it.
Right.
And I think we may start there. Somebody's going to end up being made an example of.
It does happen.
And I think that's going to come down to, I don't even think it'll be negligence. I think that is simply going to be, we have to, release an FAQ, appropriate implementation on this control. We've seen it be squishy too many times, right? With more vague requirements comes more broad interpretation. And we're going to find that as CMMC gets assessed in practice, C3PAOs, the assessors, are going to come back and say, this doesn't make sense. There's a lot of nuance in this. The training didn't cover that. And it's going to have to be both clarified and enforced. And that's probably going to happen at the same time, I think. So yeah, starting with a smaller scope, or just being honest about where you think your scope is. And when in doubt, erring on the side of caution is going to be significantly better than, oh, I'm too small for someone to care.
Right.
Because that's how you wind up in a place where to use GDPR again, up to 3% annual turnover net, not or gross, I want to say, in fines if you're just straight up negligent on some of the rules. Oh, well, we can't afford that. And if you can't afford that, you can't afford GDPR. You might not
Right.
have a viable business plan. I think CMMC is going to be a similar situation once it gets up and running.
Well,
You can't stick your head in the sand. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, and I think this is probably a good place to wrap it up. These frameworks, these approaches, regulated or otherwise, to securing data is not about penalizing the organizations that they're asking to do this. We're
Nope.
seeing this right now with what uh, the federal government's put out around, what's appropriate with AI. I mean, you can't have a conversation without saying something GDP. Chat
Chat GPT. Yeah.
Chat GPT, Chat
Yeah.
GPT, yeah, GDPR, right? Fill in the blank for privacy protection. But what's interesting about what they put out, I think it was in 2020 or 2021, it was a whole security protocols recommendation for ensuring that what does get put out is being done with the appropriate safeguards in place. Like you don't want to have this thing be evil. You don't want it to be malicious. You don't want it to incite things that are not true. And the problem that we had is that then they said, and do this on the honor system. Like, do
Yeah.
this because you're a good company.
The NIST AI risk management framework, which I think is what you're probably
Yeah,
referring to.
that sounds right.
They've defined it. It really isn't, it's not a function, in my mind at least, of controls and validation.
No.
It's a function of risk management. You've got it, they present a bunch of really valid questions to use as
Yes.
input during decision making. Is this valid and reliable, safe, secure and resilient, accountable and transparent, explainable and interpretable, which is a big one, privacy enhanced, and is it fair with harmful bias managed? And there's a bunch of sub questions that you ask yourself that are extremely valuable. And I think we're moving in that direction a lot more, where guidance should be informing earlier in the process. Control design should be informed by risk.
Because once it's out of the bag, you can't put it back in. I mean, and I'll add, I was, at Blue Team Con, the guy from Microsoft research team, and I'm drawing a blank on his name at the moment, but he literally said this. He goes, "We also have to change the way we do things." He goes, testing for, security testing for, SQL injections on a chat box text field. Well, that's not what we're worried about. We're worried about after the person puts in the text that they want to do that's malicious, is informing the bot to reject that because
Yeah.
it's bad information, not that it's bad logic.
Yeah, the garbage in, garbage out
Right.
argument
And we're
around.
all saying that, right? Like, and be careful with what you're using, garbage in, garbage out. Well, I think we just went and added another topic there at the end. But my point
That's a
was,
whole different podcast.
if we didn't have these frameworks being created, I think we would continuously go in a direction that would make lives for the threat actors continuously easier to steal data. And that's what we're obviously trying to stop. And we're very far behind the eight ball. So for those of you listening, if you got suggestions for a podcast episode, you know where to find me. Thanks again for being on the show, and everybody out there, have a great week.